Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the Book Tribe podcast. And this season, we're doing things a little bit differently to last time. In each episode, we're zeroing in on key skill areas for authors who are looking to build a business out of their passion. And today, we're talking about bookkeeping. And to help me navigate this topic is Alisha Thomas, owner of Wait What Bookkeeping and Consulting. Welcome, Alisha.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. It was really weird because I came across your discussion of bookkeeping for creatives on another podcast and I saw it and I was like, I absolutely have to bring her on. This is such an important topic, so I'm really glad that we get to do this. But before we get into it, we have to start with a bookish question. So the question I'd like to ask you is, if you're stuck on a deserted island with only 3 books, which 3 would you bring?
Okay, so it's funny because my 3 books are going to be books that wouldn't help you on a desert island, but you know what I mean? Like it's like they're all business books, but your business probably wouldn't do too well on a desert island by yourself, but they're great books. So I would pick The E-Myth Revisited, which is like a classic business book about kind of how to take your passion and make it how you're going to have to make it into a business. The second would be Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, which is great for really for a business, but also just anything that you want to be successful in life, just kind of like good skills to like make sure you're like honing in on. And the third is this really silly book called Think and Grow Rich. So this book is originally from 1930 something, 39 maybe. And it's this, I really also, this is nerdy, but I really like old business books that are like, they're written like by white men for white men. So it's like, I like somehow it's like, this was never intended to be read by a woman, you know? But it's basically about manifestation, but it's crazy, but it's about kind of like getting your brain to like think about like making money. And it's real, the beginning's a little problematic because it's written in the 30s, but my copy's from like the 60s. But yeah, it's still like a good, the gist of it is kind of like how to like, you know, to think and grow rich. And it's a fun read if you like business books.
Yeah, but this is the thing, is that for a lot of authors, and the conversations that I've had with other guests on the podcast, is that, you know, one of the biggest hurdles is having a business mindset and understanding how to navigate that. So I'm sure those books will be really useful, and if we can put those into the podcast
Yeah.
description, then I'll absolutely link those below. But
Oh,
let's get
also, I will say all of these books are old business books, so buy them used for like $3. Like you could probably, you know what I mean? Like they are all
yeah.
like there's been millions of copies of all of these books, so buy them used.
Yeah, or maybe see if they're in the library, you know, they
Oh
might be
my
there
gosh,
as
it will
well.
definitely be in the library. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to first off talk about how you got into kind of helping creatives with bookkeeping. Do you mind kind of giving us a bit of context?
Yeah. It's kind of one of those accident businesses. I went to school for art. All I've ever done is like loved textiles and sewing and art, and that's all. I mean, I went to college for that. I never saw myself doing anything else. My husband's also an artist, so it's like I'm really surrounded by different like creatives and makers. But I had a friend who owned a business and it was like the beginning of a business. He didn't know I mean, he had a great product, but he didn't know anything else and nobody else did either. And I started just kind of helping them as like a friend helping them. And they didn't have enough money to pay me. So they just gave me like shares of the company. And like, let's also remember, like, we didn't even know what shares of a company meant back then. It
Yeah.
was just like, here, what if I just give you some of the company? And so I accidentally became an owner of the company. So then I owned part of this company and we made these things called freakers and they're knit bottle koozies. So imagine like a sweater, but it's stretchy and it fits over like a beer bottle, a can. So the idea of whatever the size of your vessel is, it would fit over it. And the founder went on Shark Tank. So then when he went on Shark Tank, we didn't make a deal, but like we were so itty bitty and like just being on TV just like really escalate, like everything just kind of blew up. So when that happened, we really had to figure out like systems, and that really forced me to like, I was literally like, we have all these checks that need to go in the bank, we have all these bills that need to be paid, and I literally was like, is there like a system? I'll make a system for this. That system is called bookkeeping, but I didn't even know that word, you know, like I
Yeah.
didn't know what that meant. So luckily we had an intern whose mom was a CPA, and her name was Janet, and she was an angel, and she sat with me on Saturdays and we drink coffee, and she'd be like, this is what accounting is, this is what bookkeeping is, this is how you can do this. And so we were managing like inventory and like a lot bigger things. And yeah, and so that's how I learned how to do it. And then I like was with that company for about 7 years, and I was like young, so like you're working all the time. My husband ended up working there, all my friends worked there, so it was very all encompassing. And so I just wanted to work all the time, so I sold my shares, I left the company, and I was like, I'm going to do something else. I just want to make stuff, I just want to sew. And I just had friends who would be like, hey, can you help me with QuickBooks? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. And I legitimately was like, don't tell anyone I know how to do this. And then someone else, I'm like, I'll help you. Okay, I'll help you. And then eventually I was like, well, if we're doing this, we might as well make it a business, and we might as well make it cute. And so Drew and Kate are my very good friends, but they also took all my photos and did my website. So that really helped me. And my friend Catherine did my logo. Her company is called Friend Mina. And so then we made it a real business. And so I only work with creatives, and I help creatives like understand bookkeeping. We help creatives with their bookkeeping, and we also do bookkeeping. So like if you're at a high enough level where you're like, I'm done with this, take this off my plate, we also do that. So that's kind of how I got into it. So we've been doing it for about 5 years now, and it's really fun.
Yeah, because from my own background as well, I did a BA in acting, and so that is a career step. I was like, at that point, I was like, what, 22, and it was how, like, you don't really understand that this is a business at that point, and then you have to think about things like bookkeeping and marketing and networking. And so I can imagine that for many creatives, that's kind of the situation that they're in, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like you're doing the thing you love doing, but you don't realize that like, oh, I want to keep doing this, but the only way to do it is to make money from it so you can keep doing it. And to make money or to do it, you have to do these other things. So, yeah, it's it's like a necessary evil basically.
And are there any like common misconceptions that you find, with a lot of creatives going into bookkeeping? Are there any things that you see people kind of thinking about bookkeeping before they even start?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing is that people just don't want to think about it. It's like it's a lot of times it's like they're too scared about it. And I think also I think there's some sort of like weird like if you're an artist or creative that you can't do this other stuff, and like you can, because we're all paying our bills and we're all like, you know, buying food. We're all keeping it together. So like I promise you can probably figure out bookkeeping for like your creative business. But I think there's like an aversion to it, or there's also just kind of like it's like no one wants to talk about it because they don't think they're doing it right, and they don't want anyone to know they're not doing it right. So then it's like kind of like it's a terrible cycle, because it's like I don't want to talk about it, so it gets worse, and then later they're like, okay, I've been doing this for a few years and I haven't been doing it right. And then a lot of I'll talk to someone and they're like, we just go through it and figure it all out, and then they feel so much better. So I mean, it's really just like I'd rather just like not think about it. That's the first step is really just like talking about it and figuring it out, and then once you figure it out and learn how to do it, it's really not as hard as you think it's going to be.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's also like, talking about money is always something that, in polite conversation, it's just like you don't really talk about money openly. And so to talk about it is probably one of those kind of, oh God, kind of
Yeah, and
feelings.
I think the other big thing is like working with creatives is like it's not real estate. You didn't get into this to make money. You got into this to do the thing you love to do, and you'd like to support yourself doing that. So I think a lot of times there's also like I don't want to say greedy, but like that's not their goal isn't necessarily to be monetarily. It's just to be able to do the thing they love. So it's a different kind of thing than someone who's like doing real estate or something like that.
Yeah. So if we kind of narrow down on the audience of this podcast, which is authors, why do you think that bookkeeping is essential to this group of people?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that, so once you start making money, if you write something and someone pays you for it, like you're in the system now, like you've got to get set up somehow. And, we're in North Carolina. But you have to, like, the IRS says that you have to have a system. It doesn't necessarily have to be QuickBooks, but you have to have a record keeping system and you have to file taxes. So it's just one of those things that, like, okay, that's the next step. And so, yeah, so I think that, like, the thing is that you've got to just kind of keep track of it. And I think especially what's cool about being a writer, is all the tax deductions that you have too, because of, like, the books that you buy to help you write the books. That's a tax deduction, which is really cool because you already want to buy those books. So
Yeah.
I love things like that, about writers.
Yeah. And does it kind of matter, as you say, do they have to have had a book sold first and written first, or can they start thinking about this at any kind of
I
point
mean,
in that journey?
yeah, I think that, well, one, you essentially could think of yourself as a startup. Like, I'm going to write this book in the same way as I'm going to start this business. So you can already start, and so you could have startup cost and things. You buy a computer, that would be a tax deduction to write your book and things like that. So you're already kind of in the system. Well, and that's the other thing is, like, you also, why not let it be a tax deduction, you know? So that's another reason why you should get it together. Like,
Yeah,
try to keep
because
it
I've
organized.
I've done a few kind of self assessments here in the UK, and you've got your normal job, say, and that's your normal income, and you get taxed for that amount. But then also, if you have this business, now tell me if I'm wrong, Alisha, but also if you have this business and you have those startup costs, that then deducts from your overall tax, right?
Yeah, yep. So, like, it all gets mushed together. Yeah. So yeah, so it's like, if you and a lot of people have, like, a W in America, a W-2 job that your employer is taking the taxes out for you and remitting them. A lot of people do that, and then you're getting started. You have this side kind of gig going on, whether it be, you know, writing or copywriting or whatever. And yeah, so then what happens is, when you go to file your taxes, you've got to report that income that you've made and the expenses that you've incurred to make that income. And
Yeah.
so it's all going to get mushed together against it. Yeah.
Just while we're talking about this, because I'm also thinking in my head that in the UK we have to submit our self assessments by the 31st of January, or paid our self assessment tax by the 31st. So then for myself, I always make sure that I've done my self assessment like 6 months in advance, and the tax year ends in April. In the US, what kind of dates do people have to be aware of?
So our taxes are due in April. So for the previous year. So basically, what I always tell people is, you want to start, like, I mean, ideally you're doing your bookkeeping every week, every month, but really September is the month that you want to sit down, September, October in the fall, and look at how much money you've made, and kind of, like, see, like, okay, this is the point where I also recommend that you get a CPA. So I don't know what that is in the UK, but, like, it's a certified public accountant, and they're going to be the ones that help you file your taxes.
Mhm.
So a bookkeeper like me, I help you organize all the numbers, and I help you put everything in the right boxes so that the CPA can then file your taxes. So I always say September, October. Even, you know what, before that, in the summer is where you should get your CPA. Don't wait until January to get a CPA, because CPAs are so busy and so, like, trying to do taxes. So you want to, May, June, you want to be, like, finding the CPA that's going to do your taxes for that year. Then September, October, you compile all your numbers, you see how much money you made. And then that's when you would want to reach out to your CPA and say, hey, listen, I've actually made, let's say $60,000 more than I thought. And so that gives you a little bit of time before the end of the year if you need to spend more money. So if the CPA can say, like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And they can, they have like tax saving advice that they can give you. Or maybe they say, hey, is now the time that you need to buy a new computer or whatever. And then, and that way you're not, in January, the CPA isn't going to tell you how much money you owe in taxes and you're shocked. But that's why it's kind of nice to kind of look at it and see, and then, tell them, this is how I think the rest of the year is going to be. And then in January is when you're going to compile all of your bookkeeping stuff for the whole year, and then you give it to a CPA, and the CPA does your taxes by April. And then we also have estimated taxes here. So, and those are paid quarterly, and a CPA would help you come up with that amount and be like, 300 every quarter or whatever.
Yeah. And just one final question before we go back to my actual questions that
Yeah.
I've prepared. Is obviously that would be a paid service. What if an author can't really afford that? Can they manage that process themselves?
I really do think you, especially in the beginning, you can do your own bookkeeping. You can do your own books and pay your own sales tax if that's something you have to do. A CPA is something I think is worth the money to help guide you. And also, just because a CPA is going to, if you get a weird thing in the mail, you can be like, hey, CPA, I got a letter from the IRS. What does this mean? And I also help people who are my retainer clients. But when you're just starting out, it's just nice to kind of give you a CPA kind of helps make sure you're set up on the right track. But yeah, you could definitely do your own, pay your own, estimated taxes and things like that. And we do have TurboTax and things like that. I just think I think that you're missing having a CPA look over it so they can think of any extra things that you might be missing is nice. And that's probably something I would try to get.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I was just kind of you kept talking and more questions kept coming out. So let's go back to the authors then. So with kind of the practice of good kind of bookkeeping, do you think that it can also help authors to make those informed business decisions, maybe later on in their journey? But do you think it can help them to do that?
Yeah, for sure. And so you do bookkeeping for two reasons. One is so that you know your numbers, so that you know how much money you're making, how much money you're spending. And so then you can look back, especially if you've been doing it for a while, that you could look back and say oh, wow, I really had more sales last May than I did last, but then in April, nothing really, it's kind of a slumpy month in April. So I'm going to not spend as much money in April. And then it kind of helps you guide you and you say, okay, well, May is when I'm going to make my money. So then in June is when I'm going to make that larger purchase. And so that you're not just guessing and you're not just saying and that way you're not running out of money. So that's the first thing bookkeeping does. And the second thing is taxes. You have to have it for taxes and you have to have receipts and things like that. But yeah, you want to know also, I think in a world where so many apps, and I'm sure with authors, any sort of app you're using, and then we all use a million of them, it's nice to have it all. So if you use QuickBooks, it's going to connect your bank accounts and credit cards and list all of them, and make sure that you're not paying for an app that you're not using. Or I've even seen people who are paying for the same app twice because they didn't know they had two, just because
Wow.
you see Adobe and then you're oh, I forgot I got that one. And then later and so that's what's nice about, you can see all of your expenses so that you're helping making sure that you're spending wisely.
Yeah, and so when we start to kind of talk about the process of getting set up, getting onto that QuickBooks or whatever, or even just the process, what is that first step for an
Okay, your
author?
first step is okay, let's start from very beginning. You're like, I really want to write a book and I want to turn this book into a thing I'm making money off of. The first thing I would do is I would open a separate bank account. So just keep your business and your personal separate. That's the number one thing you could do. And it's also the number one thing that it's if it's separated like that, it's so much easier for taxes. It's so much easier to see. When it's all intertwined, you don't know what's what. So even if you're just starting and you're not even you're not thinking about a business entity or any higher level things like that, you could at least just go to your bank that you bank to now and say, hey, can I just open a separate bank account? And that's the easiest thing you could do. And then later, once you start making money and start selling things and, having revenue come in, you can always then, become an LLC or whatever. And then you can open a business bank account, but at least start that first year of just keeping it separate.
Yeah. And so how do you think authors should begin to kind of categorize those kind of income streams, I guess? Because as you just said, there's the book sales, but then what if there's also speaking fees? And what if there's course fees that, they've built a course and they're selling that? So how do you think they can start to categorize those?
I mean, so QuickBooks is where this is why QuickBooks is wonderful. And QuickBooks it's just been around forever. And it's just the most, it just has, it's the most robust. It has the most reports. It has the most everything. And there's lots of other accounting things, but I just think QuickBooks is like, I don't know, it's just kind of the standard. So that's why I always recommend QuickBooks. And I think you can learn QuickBooks on your own, but in QuickBooks, you're able to make these categorizations that will help. It's just so nice to see it. So yes, so you can make one that like you would say sales, and then it would say book sales. It could say speaking engagement sales. And then so you can see, and so it comes through your bank account. And so if say you got paid $1,000 to speak on a panel, you would code that as like speaking, and then you'd be able to run a report and see how much money you made over the course of a year, or, you know, if you were selling like templates or whatever. And then so basically, and then the expenses are the same way in QuickBooks. You categorize all of your expenses, and you can categorize them. You're categorizing them like in a way that like a CPA will understand, but also in a way that you'll understand, so that you'll be able to see like this is a marketing expense versus, and you can kind of like group them together very easily. So you can be like, all right, here's all my marketing, but then I could also see here's Facebook ads, here's whatever. And that's called a profit and loss statement when you mush all that together. And it's so QuickBooks makes these reports so you can see it. I think that's the other thing that people ask me is they say, I just don't know how I'm supposed to see how can I see all my income and all my expenses? And like, you put it all in QuickBooks and it produces this profit and loss report for you. And then in QuickBooks, you can pull it again. You can like put it against yours. And it really is easier than, it seems overwhelming at first, but once you start doing it, it gets pretty, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had some experience of my own kind of playing around with it. It wasn't QuickBooks, it was something else. I can't remember what the name was. It was a few years ago now, but actually just being able to get the visibility on those figures, and me being able to go back to my boss and being like, well, I don't know where this money is going, but we need to, you know, looking at where the money is kind of those key category spend areas are, and being like, why are we paying that much for a telephone? You know, it was like $2,000 for a telephone system, and I was like, why are we paying that much money? Anyway, but you do, as you say, you get used to it. The more you practice it, it kind of just becomes second nature, and it's a quicker process. And so going to the expenses side, I think it's a really fun topic to start talking about expenses, because as you said earlier, there are things that perhaps authors don't realize they can claim as expenses. So have you got any kind of things that authors might have to consider?
Yeah, I think the best way to think about like a tax deduction, and like in America, we obviously have like a tax code and you can like look it up to see what it is. But really, you have to think about it like, what if you have to spend money, like to like, if this is something that you're spending money on that's going to help you make money, then that's kind of like the realm of a tax deduction. You know what I mean? So, I mean, and you're kind of, and the other thing I think that people don't realize about taxes is like, it's kind of the honor system. So you are literally like, okay, I think that this is a tax deduction. And then if you got audited is the only way that they're going to kind of know. And a CPA will help guide you too. But you want to like, there are taxes. I see people who are often very scared. It's like, they're like, oh, do you think this book would be it? And it's like, yes, a book that you're reading that's going to help you make more money, or a course, or an event, or if you go speak, if you hear other authors, you hear them go read their book, that it's going to inspire you to make more money. Like that's a way that you're making, you know, that's an expense that you're incurring to make more money. So, and then also if you have to travel to go do that travel is a tax deduction. So and especially I think with like someone in a creative field, like a writer, it's like kind of all income, like that's your life. You know what I mean? Like that is for you to do all that stuff. It's not like you know, and I think this is also for all entrepreneurs, but you know, you don't just like go to work at a corporate job. Like you are trying to like meet people and you're trying to network. And so all of that in between, getting coffee with that other writer, that's a tax deduction. And so you just want to make sure keeping very good records of everything. So if you do go to coffee with another writer and you guys talk about like, you know, what you're writing or whatever, you want to, on your little coffee receipt, you want to write who you were with and what you talked about. Make sure the date and the amounts on there. And, you know, obviously with taxes, there are things like you can't you can't go out with a friend and spend $2,000 and say we talked about books every week. You know what I mean? Like it's like it. So the way that our tax laws is that it has to be ordinary and necessary. So coffee with a friend is pretty ordinary, and discussing books is what you do that's necessary. So I think that would fit into that thing, into that like box. So those are the things you kind of think about those realms. It'll kind of help you. You want to get as many tax deduction as possible though, because that's the name of the game.
Yeah. And also when it comes to audits, they're looking out really for the people that are really abusing the system. And if you are kind of doing the reasonable things of oh well, I went and met this author and we had a chat, and that kind of thing, it's a reasonable expense, isn't it? So
Yes. And that, yeah. And the other thing is like with a CPA can also help guide you and be like, hey, listen, so say you were like, hey, I really thought that, I bought, let's say I'm just going to make something up. Let's say I took pictures of my dog with my book for social media. So I wrote the dog bed off. I thought that could be a tax deduction for me. So I paid for that and something like that. And say you thought, which I think that's like people do crazy stuff, but a CPA is a great person to then run that by and be like, what do you think? And the CPA might say, I think that's a little too far out there. And then all they do is just take that amount of money, and then that gets moved to owner's draw and not to like a tax deduction. So they can kind of help guide you. And so that if you ever did get audited, you kind of had some guidance along the way. But also just use common sense.
Yeah. And so when we start to think about like the mistakes that people typically make when it comes to bookkeeping, are there any things that are like common mistakes people tend to make?
Yeah. One is commingling, like mixing your personal with your business. And that is just like, it just gets really, really messy really quick. And it makes it hard. It makes your life harder to be like, what was that? Is that a personal, especially when it's things like Amazon where it's so vague. Like Amazon is like saying cash. So it could be anything for your house or for your business. So you want to make sure that that you're keeping everything separate as possible, have separate bank accounts. And that way it's going to be so much better if you're keeping track of that. Another big thing, let's see, that people do is like kind of forgetting other credit cards that they've been using for I don't know why this happens, but someone will be like, oh, I also have that other credit card I use for my business. And it's like, well, that also needs to be connected to your bookkeeping. Like you've got in your books, and you're basically writing the story of your business. So it's like, this is every expense and every income I've ever made and every trip I've taken is in this in your QuickBooks of and it tells the story of your business. So you want to make sure that you've included everything in there, every receipt, so making sure everything's in there. And also you have to do this thing in QuickBooks called reconciling your books. And on every accounting software, it's called reconciling. And it's basically what you do is at the end of the month, you look at your bank account and you say, okay, my bank account balance ending was $3,052. And you need to make sure your QuickBooks balance is the same. And if those two things are not the same, then something is wrong, something got duplicated or something is missing, and you've got to figure it out, right? And so you have to reconcile. If you're not reconciling your QuickBooks, then I would bet anything is wrong. Like it's just it's just the nature of it. So every month you have to reconcile every bank account, every savings account, and every credit card. And so that is something I see people not doing. They literally will just buy, and I get it, because how do you know this stuff? If you don't know, you don't know. But people will buy QuickBooks and then they'll hook their bank account up to it and they'll categorize things. And like, I did it. And I would feel like I did it too, because it doesn't tell you like, have you reconciled this month? But every month you need to be making sure it matches so that you can fix any errors that occur. And then at the end of the year, you would know that your books are actually accurate.
Yeah, as you say, it's really useful for catching those things that you might have missed. And it could have been something as little as like £1 or $1 that you've just missed that you spent on something, and you're just like, oh, wait a minute, I did forget about that. Then you go trawling back through your accounts, just like, what was that £1? I haven't got a receipt for it. And then you have to go find your receipt.
Well, and so QuickBooks, the way QuickBooks works is it connects to your bank account and your credit cards and pulls in all of your transactions. So it's like all automated. It's so much, especially anyone who tried QuickBooks years, like let's say 20 years ago, or even like when I started using it, like probably 15 years ago, I was manually doing all of my bank data. It connects to your bank account, which is great. But sometimes, technology, sometimes it will duplicate things. Sometimes it will miss a few days. And like, so that's why you just kind of like, as great and wonderful it is, you have to double check it every month to make sure it's accurate.
Yeah. And so these kind of common mistakes, I guess they're easily avoidable, but just it's that knowledge, really. It's having the knowledge to navigate that. That's holding people back.
Yeah, I think also it's just annoying. Like no one wants to, it's like, it's an annoying thing that isn't the thing you want to do. It's not the thing you love to do. But what it really is like also here's the other thing. It's so much easier to get started in the beginning. Like people who I've met who've like, I've been selling, I've been doing whatever for 5 years. And then then it's just like and it's so hard because you're so deep in all of your things. So it's so much easier when you're starting in the beginning to get it set up right and to get everything organized. And then that way you kind of have a good system. And that way, when you're busy and you are on book tours and you are selling your book, you don't have to worry about your finances because you already have a system. And when you're just starting out and you have a lot more free time, you want to set that up so you're ready to go whenever you're busy. It's like it's already second nature to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely I agree with that one. So what are the consequences of bad bookkeeping?
Well, there's several. I mean, the biggest one is, and I've definitely had clients that have done this who I'll see their books and then I'll say, did you file your taxes with these books? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, well, they're wrong. And so then I've seen people pay too much in taxes just because their books were wrong, just because they didn't reconcile, like something was missing, and it's actually, or it's just wrong. So if they got audited, it would be incorrect. So they'd have to like go back and like, especially when someone like me sees their books and I'm like, oh, this isn't right, and then they have to go back and like refile taxes in prior years. I'm like, that's not what you want to do. So like, that's the number one thing. Like, that's the worst thing, is like paying too much or not a little, and then someone seeing it and being like, and that's the thing about having a CPA, is a CPA is wonderful, but they don't look in that nitty gritty. So like bookkeepers are like detail oriented people that are like line by line, kind of like looking at things. And so CPAs, you give them the bigger picture. So if it says you spent 10,000 in marketing, they say, okay, you spent 10,000 in marketing. They don't check to make sure that number's accurate, to where like a bookkeeper is doing that double checking. So, yeah, that's the tax implication is the big one. But the other thing is like you not knowing your numbers and you thinking, and that's what happens too, is people will say, but I sold $10,000 last month, but then I don't know, I don't have any money in my bank account, because they're not capturing their expenses accurately. And like, well, you spent 12,000 in expenses. That's why you don't have any money in your, but it's like, they're not seeing it. So that way, too. So it's kind of both things.
Yeah. And I guess for authors who are probably listening and just like, well, at the moment, I'm not really earning that much out of my books. Maybe it's more like £500 or dollars to 1,000, because sometimes that's the average income of a self-published author, particularly. Is it still worth doing this?
I guess I would say yes, because I also think that the other thing that I see happening when I work with clients, which is going to sound crazy, is the second I work with someone and they're like, I'm going to get this together, I'm going to get these books together, I'm going to looking at these numbers, I promise you 98% of people make more money the next year, because they're focused on it. It's serious. They've made it a priority that I'm going to care about my finances. I'm going to sell that thing. And they see on paper they're not selling enough. And so they figure out marketing strategies to help them. And so, that's why I would encourage you to do it. I think if you're not making that much money and you're like, I don't know, QuickBooks is the right path yet, you could at least, and I never recommend this really, but you could at least have a Google Doc. You could at least have a way to track it that is, I'm going to say, at some point when you're making enough money or you get serious, you've really got to switch to like QuickBooks. But yeah, you could always just use a Google Doc to track income and expenses and kind of just at least look at it. And that's what you should, you could at least do that in the first couple months to be like, is this what I really want to do, with my time? Because it is really, it's you making a decision. If I'm going to make this a business, then I've got to like make this a business, and make money and then organize that money.
Yeah, and as you say, it's a daunting process. But do you have any kind of simple tips for kind of organizing people's finances? For doing this bookkeeping piece.
Yeah, the first one is really just going to be like, get QuickBooks. That's your first one. But
They
is,
should pay you. You should make money every time that you say QuickBooks.
I know, right? It's so funny because they don't even really have like an affiliate thing. So it's not even like it's like it's like I could sell a QuickBooks subscription, but generally I just tell people to get simple start, like I'm like, get the cheapest one. And like, I don't make any money with that, but, QuickBooks. But the other thing is, even if you're just starting out, just getting that bank account or credit card and then using that for all of your expenses, and then just look at them. Just look at them. And so that, get used to looking at it and get comfortable looking at it. And, I also, gosh, another, like, I mean, that's like the really, really big one is just like looking at it. It's just taking
Mhm.
the time to look at it and make decisions based on that.
And in terms of cadence,
Oh, yeah.
how often should authors be kind of looking at their finances?
Yeah, I would say, if you're using QuickBooks and even if you're not using QuickBooks, once a week, I always tell people to make a like little bookkeeping date with yourself. Put it in your calendar and pick a day. Tuesday mornings at 9 o'clock. You want to be fresh. You don't want to, you don't want to do this unless you're like a night owl or something. But generally, you want to, because this isn't your favorite thing. So you want to make it a time that you're gonna have a cup of coffee or tea or whatever your favorite thing is to kind of hype yourself up. And then you're gonna categorize your stuff, and you're gonna look at all of your transactions from the prior week and once a week, and then you're gonna code them in QuickBooks or however you're doing it. And then once a month, you're going to reconcile all of your accounts, and that's where you check it against the bank account, make sure it's accurate. And then I would say then every year, have the check-ins with like a CPA. But it's like once a week, and then once a month you're going to reconcile everything.
Yeah, and if they're using QuickBooks, or even if they're not, is it a good idea to kind of back up that data anywhere? Is it necessary if you're using QuickBooks?
The other great thing about QuickBooks is that QuickBooks is like a cloud in itself. So you can upload all of your receipts to QuickBooks. And that in itself for me is it's so nice. So there's an app that you can take a picture of your receipt and then upload it to QuickBooks. You can forward from your email to QuickBooks. You can just upload a bunch and just throw them in there. And so I think that again, going with that, you're building the story of your business. Like you just want to keep everything in one spot. If you're not using QuickBooks, yeah, you want to take pictures of all of your receipts and you want to save them to the cloud. So I use Dropbox or Google Drive. You want to don't save them to your computer. That's if someone steals it, if it crashes, and also the other thing is paper. Don't just save paper, because paper, especially receipts, we know they just disintegrate. So you want to always take pictures of them. And maybe in that once a week, go through your bag and see where you just shoved receipts in there, pull them out, take a picture, upload them to QuickBooks or save them to the cloud, because there's and that's the best way. Because that's the other thing is you don't want to wait. That the other thing about keeping up with this stuff is you don't want to wait for 6 months later and you're like, I have no idea what this is for. No idea. I don't know anything 2 weeks ago. So it's like that doing it weekly will be like, oh yeah, I remember what I did. I remember, who I had coffee with. I remember what I bought at, the art supply store or whatever. So keeping up with that is going to be also a good thing. And then in QuickBooks, you also can export everything if you wanted to download it and keep it. But yeah.
Great stuff. And in terms of resources, then, for authors to kind of dig into, what is available for them to kind of learn more about bookkeeping? Of course, you've got your course as well that you offer. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So Wait What Consulting, my Instagram, I do a lot of obviously free, just education, talking about bookkeeping. I have a free newsletter called Ladies Who Crunch, that it's about, everything bookkeeping, but also business stuff too. Any book or podcast I listen to that I think is cool or inspiring. And all of it's very targeted to people who are not business-minded people by nature. So I think we just try to make it approachable and we try to make it fun. And we have a course that came out that is a QuickBooks course. So the thing about QuickBooks is that it is giant. So you can literally, it's so many things you can do, and it's very overwhelming at first. So I created a course that's literally this is exactly how you're going to do it. It's little 5-minute videos walking you through what to do. It's very easy to understand. And it's literally things like, don't look at this stuff, like just because you don't need inventory, or maybe not yet, things like that. It's like, you just want to like simplify it, because I think the overwhelming piece of it, I think it really discourages people. So the course really breaks it down, and it's me talking in a very natural, normal way. And it's about an hour and a half-ish. So by the time you watch your favorite movie, you could do it. Yeah, and it's called Artistic Accounting. But yeah.
Amazing. And you also offer some consulting as well, as you mentioned. How can
Yeah.
authors tap into that if they want?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I also offer like one-on-one consulting, and it's through Zoom, so you could do it from anywhere. And it could be a couple of things. It could be, I have literally nowhere to start. I need someone to hold my hand and help me. We can do that. It could also be like, I'm using QuickBooks, but I have a couple funky things. You know what I mean? That thing where, and I'm really a proponent of people doing their books in the beginning themselves. So then it's like, we could get in a call and I can troubleshoot you through QuickBooks. I know a lot about QuickBooks. And the other thing is, because I'm a QuickBooks accountant, if it was an issue, this is something I always tell people, like, I can call QuickBooks and I get through immediately to a human. Like, it's that like access, that line. And so someone will be like, oh, I spent 5 hours trying to figure out this thing in QuickBooks. I've been Googling Reddits, and I'm like, you could call me or book a call, and then I could probably help you. But if I couldn't, I can call QuickBooks and get through faster. Yeah. And we also do full on take your books over. So yeah, we do bookkeeping for copywriters. We do bookkeeping for graphic designers, for a whole soap maker. We have lots of different clients. I love them. They're all so different. So yeah. So when you get to the point, and that's the thing, is like, you don't want to do your bookkeeping probably forever. Like, once you get to a point where and that's the idea, kind of, if you ever, the E-Myth book I recommended, it's kind of about that kind of like tipping point of like, you've got to get it together at first, but then eventually you've got to hand that over to someone else, so you can focus more on like the thing you love to do and the thing that's going to make you money, which is writing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. And we like to leave our audience with kind of one last piece of advice from our guest speaker. So if you could leave our listeners with one last piece of advice, what would that be?
Gosh. Okay. I mean, really, in the sense of like in the sense of money, in the sense of finances, coming from personal experience and someone who never ever thought they would understand this stuff, like, you really can understand it. You've just gotta, it's just like learning to cook or learning to a new language. It's just, you've got to like put the time in, and like, you really can do it, and not to be discouraged by, also, I think, I feel like society tells you, like, if you're creative, you can't do this stuff. And like, that's really just BS. So, and if I could do it, you can too. So that's my, just like, not to get discouraged.
Yeah, and one just little side question. So if this is asking for a friend, if you go to a nail salon and then you take pictures of books with your nails in the photo for your social media, does that count as an expense?
Yes. So no, you can't write. Okay. So it's so funny, because it's specifically, I feel like it's women. I feel like the IRS is like, this is for women. So you can't write off something that you're going to get use out of after. So clothes is a huge one. So you can't write off clothing unless like it's a uniform or a costume, something you would never wear in your real life. So like, if I bought this shirt for a photo shoot, I couldn't wear it unless maybe it said, wait, what? Then it would be marketing. And that's a different thing. That doesn't count because it's marketing. So that's a loophole there. But the other thing about nails is, like, if you go get your nails done, are you going to be using that later? Like, yes, if I got my nails done for a photo shoot, in today, 2 weeks later, I'm still have it's like, so then that wouldn't count. I also always say, like, defer to your CPA. I am not the end all be all, and you can do, and the other thing is, like, what if your job was selling nail polish? You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of a weird kind of thing, but generally think about, like, you can't, a haircut can't be a tax deduction because you can use it later. But say you got your hair styled for a shoot that was that day, that hair is only going to last for that day. So that would be, or if you got your makeup done for that day, that could be a tax deduction, but you couldn't go to the store and buy makeup for it. It's like that sort of thing. So you have to think about it. If you're getting any personal use out of it, it's probably not a tax.
Damn it. All right then. Well, thank you so much for your time, Alisha. It's been wonderful chatting with you. And thank you to our audience for listening. If you'd like to hear more from literary publishing, marketing, and business experts, make sure to subscribe to the Book Tribe podcast channel or join the Book Tribe author community to connect with our network of author service partners and make connections with other authors. But in the meantime, just keep on writing. And Alisha, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to have you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me.